Hi, I'm Venora. They said I was family, until I overheard them planning to kick me out the second I paid off a $900,000 mortgage, a debt they hid in my name. My husband? He laughed. My mother-in-law? She called me that girl. I stood behind the door, silent, smiling, because they didn't know. I kept every receipt, and at her retirement party, when I raised that glass, I didn't toast her, I exposed them. But it's what happened after the truth dropped that no one saw coming. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this and where from? Drop a comment below. This story gets personal. 2 days before the retirement party, our house in Houston felt like it was holding its breath. Streamers and balloons crowded the kitchen counter. The smell of store-bought cupcakes mixed with the burnt scent of the first failed batch I'd tried to bake myself. I was setting out the last of the happy retirement signs when I heard it, faint, sharp, just behind the cracked door of the den. At first, I thought it was the TV, some daytime drama playing too loud. But then I heard my name, or rather, that girl. "I can't wait until that girl moves out," Selvara hissed. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the hallway like a cold blade. My hand froze midair, a roll of tape dangling between my fingers. I stood there, staring at the door, heart beating in my ears. "You mean me?" I whispered to no one. Then Merrick's voice, calm, almost amused. "Not until she pays off the $900,000 mortgage. Then she can leave." They both laughed. The kind of laugh you give when the joke's not funny, but cruel. Like they'd just shared a secret for years, and I was too dumb to catch on. I took one step back. My elbow bumped the counter, knocking over a glass, one of the good ones. The kind we only brought out when company came. It wobbled, nearly tipped, but I caught it. My fingers curled around its stem, knuckles white. Etched across the base, in cursive, were the words, "Family First." The irony nearly made me laugh, too. I didn't push open the door. I didn't scream. Didn't cry. I just stood there, listening to my husband and his mother discuss my future like I wasn't 2 rooms away. I heard Selvara say, "She's not like us. Never was." And Merrick reply, "She was just convenient." That word, convenient, burned hotter than the rest. It wasn't new. I'd felt it, silently endured it in side comments, in missed invitations, in the way she'd hand me plastic cutlery while her own daughters got the real silver. But hearing it spoken, it hit different. I stepped away, my feet making no sound on the tile. Walked to the door, not to barge in, just to shut it, slowly, quietly. Let them sit in their comfort, unaware that the game had changed. I didn't cry. And I didn't even feel sad. I felt still, like the air before a thunderstorm. I walked back to the kitchen, wiped down the counter again, though it was already clean. My fingers moved on autopilot, but my thoughts buzzed. If this is how they talk when they think I'm not listening, then I've never really been part of this family. I thought of all the years I'd tried to belong. The holidays I hosted, the nights I stayed up wrapping gifts not addressed to me, the times I offered help only to be brushed off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And now I knew, convenient, that's all I'd ever been. I stared at the family first glass again and thought, maybe it's time I stop putting myself last. The front door opened with a thud, Merrick walking in from the garage. He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Everything set for the party?" I nodded, keeping my face blank. "Almost done." He kissed my cheek. I didn't lean in. "I'll go check the seating chart with Mom," he said, heading toward the den. Of course you will, I thought. I turned away before I could say something I'd regret, or maybe not regret at all. That night, while Merrick slept, I lay in bed wide awake, replaying every word. I tried to convince myself I'd misunderstood, that they were joking, that it didn't mean what it sounded like. But lies taste different once you know the truth. The next morning, I pulled the etched glass from the dishwasher, ran my thumb over the words. It didn't feel like a glass anymore. It felt like a lie I'd been sipping from for years. I smiled, but the kind that hides a storm, and promised myself I'd remember every word. I didn't sleep much that night. My body laid still, but my mind paced like it had somewhere urgent to go. Every word I'd overheard echoed louder in the dark. Convenient. Not until she pays it off. She's not like us. I stared at the ceiling, tracing imaginary cracks, wondering how long they'd been thinking like that. Maybe always. Maybe I'd just refused to hear it before. By morning, the sunlight pouring through the blinds felt like it belonged in someone else's house. I moved on autopilot, showered, tied my hair back, made coffee I didn't drink. I answered a dozen texts from relatives about flight times, food allergies, and hotel addresses. I called the florist to confirm the centerpieces, then the caterer, then the rental company for the chairs. The entire day pressed forward like a machine that didn't care I'd cracked open overnight. Merrick came downstairs at some point, kissed my cheek out of habit, and said, "You're amazing for pulling all this together." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I didn't know how to fake grateful anymore. By mid-morning, I was seated at the dining table, flipping through the official event program Salvara had printed and emailed to the family. I scrolled, looking for my name under hosts, then under organizers, then anywhere, nothing. I wasn't even listed as Merrick's wife, just his mother's daughter-in-law in a brief blurb on the last page. I stared at the screen, breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. Was it an oversight? A formatting issue? I told myself it didn't matter, that I was being sensitive. But deep down I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I closed the laptop a little harder than I meant to, and stood, needing to move, needing to do something that didn't feel like erasure. I started folding napkins into fans. Pointless, probably, but it gave my hands a task. The doorbell rang. It was Aunt Carlene and Uncle Doug, first to arrive for the weekend. I greeted them with a warm smile that felt more like a performance than a welcome. We hugged. I offered iced tea. Small talk flowed. Then Salvara walked in. She barely glanced at me before saying, "Venora's just always busy, aren't you, sweetheart? It gives her a sense of purpose." Carlene gave a tight smile. Doug chuckled. No one said anything cruel exactly, but the sting was there. Coated in sugar, but sharp underneath. I forced a polite laugh, swallowing the bitter taste that came with it. I wanted to scream. I'm the one paying for this party. I'm the one cleaning this house, booking the food, coordinating your flowers and your cousins and your damn legacy slideshow. I'm the one making sure this roof stays over everyone's heads. But instead, I smiled again and offered more tea. That evening, after the guests settled into their rooms and the house fell quiet again, I sat alone in the den. The same one I'd stood outside the night before. I held the same family first glass, but I wasn't fooled by it anymore. I opened my journal. Pages worn thin at the edges, secrets etched in ink that only I would ever read. I wrote, "Every silence costs me another piece of myself." And then, beneath it, "But maybe silence can also be my weapon." The pen hovered in my hand for a moment before I underlined the last sentence. Not because I fully believed it yet, but because part of me wanted to. I didn't want to yell anymore. I didn't want to beg anyone to see me. I wanted to observe, to listen, to choose my moment. Because when people think you're silent, they get careless, and when they get careless, they tell the truth. I closed the journal, leaned back into the couch, and let the quiet settle over me. But wounds don't heal when they're fresh. Sometimes they spread like fire. I spent the night thinking that maybe it would all pass. Maybe I'd read too much into it. People say awful things in private, right? Even people who smile to your face. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was sensitive. But the fire doesn't fade when you ignore it. It just spreads quieter. By early afternoon, the house was full of movement. Folding tables were being delivered. My niece and her husband argued in the driveway about whether to rent more chairs. A floral truck parked half on the lawn, and Selvara stormed out to bark about tire tracks. I stood in the foyer, sipping lukewarm coffee, trying to find my place in all of it. Then Merrick passed me a thick manila envelope. "Mom had the printer drop these off," he said, like he was handing me coupons. "Final draft of the program. She wants feedback." I opened it as he walked away, flipping through the glossy booklet. A navy and gold cover announced, "Celebrating Selvara Whitaker, a legacy of service." The first few pages were fine. Speeches from colleagues, a note from her church choir, a photo of her from 1987 at some awards banquet, then the acknowledgments page. My eyes scanned the section once. Then again, there was Selvara's daughter-in-law, Heather, thanked for helping curate the culinary experience. Heather, who'd brought 24 cookies and left them in my fridge. Heather, who couldn't spell casserole without help. The floral theme was attributed to cousin Dana, who hadn't even RSVP'd until yesterday. Even the slideshow, my slideshow, which I stayed up editing for 4 nights straight, was labeled as "Provided by the Whitaker Family Archives." My name was nowhere. Not in the footnotes, not in a casual shout-out, not even as Merrick's wife. I sat on the bottom step of the stairs, booklet open on my knees, and felt something in me shrink. I thought about the time Selvara took family photos on Thanksgiving and asked me to take the picture instead of being in it. I remembered giving up weekends to help redo her garden, only to hear her tell neighbors that Merrick had done it all himself. I thought about the time Merrick bought new patio furniture with the bonus I earned from closing a big contract, and how it was later described as his surprise gift for Mom. And now, this. A full-color, professionally printed erasure. It wasn't just disrespect. It was a warning. A few years from now, when someone finds this booklet in a drawer, they'll never know I lifted a finger. They'll never know I paid the deposit on the catering, or organized the hotel blocks, or scrubbed the baseboards because Selvara said, "Guests notice everything." They'll assume I was just another guest. Maybe not even that. I closed the booklet and stood. Selvara was in the living room, perched on the arm of the couch like a queen holding court. A few relatives lingered around her, nodding at whatever story she was telling. I waited until there was a lull, then walked over and held out the program. "Hey," I said, steady. "I think there might have been a mix-up. The acknowledgments, my name's not listed, not even for the catering." She blinked, then waved her hand like she was shooing a fly. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It was just a quick mock-up. The real one will probably include more names." "Probably. I just thought, since I coordinated most of it," I started, but she cut me off with a tight smile. "You know you do these things because you like to. No one asked you to carry the whole party on your back, Venora." Then she turned to Aunt Josie and changed the subject, leaving me standing there like I'd asked for something outrageous. I walked away before my hands could shake. Back in the kitchen, I stared out the window at the backyard, at the rented tent flapping in the wind. My reflection ghosted faintly in the glass. And I didn't want recognition. Not really. I just didn't want to be erased. That night, when the house finally quieted down, I sat at the edge of my bed and pulled out my journal again. "It's not about the program," I wrote. "It's about the pattern, the photo albums, the stories retold, the silence around my name. If they can erase me on paper, they can erase me from everything. Unless I stop it." I closed the journal and tucked it beneath my pillow. My body was exhausted, but my mind buzzed with the weight of what I was beginning to understand. And when someone decides you don't exist, the next step is to push you out. The sun was beginning to dip behind the backyard fence, casting soft amber light across the kitchen countertops. The house had a low hum to it, cutlery clinking, oven timers beeping, voices rising and falling in half laughter. But beneath the surface, Something darker pulsed like a bruise. I walked in quietly, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I'd just taken a call from the baker, confirming the tiered lemon cake Selvara insisted on. I wanted to mention it, but my voice caught when I heard her speaking. "Well, Dorian," she said, her tone airy. "Once the mortgage is done, we'll have so much flexibility with the space. I mean, it's too much house for some people, you know? Especially if they don't really need to be here." Dorian murmured something I couldn't quite catch, his voice low, casual, probably playing along, as always. He never liked to get his hands dirty, just smiled and let her do the shoving. Their tone shifted the second I stepped in. Silvara's posture straightened, her smile turned syrupy, and Dorian looked down at the countertop like a teenager caught cursing in church. "Oh, Venora, sweetheart," she said, smoothing the collar of her blouse like she hadn't just been dissecting my life behind my back. "You've done so much. Really, above and beyond." I didn't say a word. I knew that smile. I'd seen it at weddings, birthdays, funerals, always masking something sour. She stirred the pot of green beans like we were just chatting over tea. "But maybe," she continued sweetly, "it's time you started thinking about what's next. For you." "For me?" I asked, already knowing where this was headed. She didn't miss a beat. "A smaller place, perhaps. Something easier to manage. I mean, you've given so much to this house, dear, but it's not really your responsibility forever, is it?" Dorian cleared his throat but still didn't look at me. His silence was loud enough. Selvara patted my arm gently, too gently. "It's just, you're such a capable woman. Independent. You don't need to be tied down to a mortgage tied to someone else's name, do you?" There it was. The air left my lungs in one slow, steady stream. Not a scream, not a gasp, just resignation. "You mean Merrick's name?" I said flatly. She blinked, the way people do when they're pretending to be surprised. "Oh, well, technically yes. But you know how these things go. Dorian's name is the one that'll last. It's family property, really." I looked at Dorian then. He gave a half nod like he wasn't part of the conversation, like I was the only one in the room being dramatic. My hands clenched at my sides. I reminded myself to breathe. They weren't just trying to erase me from paper now. They were moving to the real thing. I signed that refinance 3 years ago. Merrick's credit wasn't good enough on his own, and Dorian's business was too new, but mine was solid. I co-signed to save our home from foreclosure after Merrick's failed investment nearly cost us everything. I thought I was helping, thought I was protecting us, but I was just building a cage. For me, every payment I made, every cutback, every freelance gig I took on, every dinner I skipped, went into that house, into this party, into keeping their world comfortable. And now, they were smiling while pointing to the exit. "We only want what's best for you," Selvara added, like she was gifting me a retirement of my own. I smiled, just enough to not seem rude. "Well," I said, pulling a dish out of the oven, "I'll think about it." She beamed. "Good girl." I turned and caught Dorian's eye. His face was unreadable, but his mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to say something. But then he looked away. Of course he did. After dinner was cleaned up and the last guest wandered out, I went upstairs, took off my shoes, and sat in the dark of my bedroom. I stared at the mortgage documents in the drawer of my nightstand. My name, my signature, the balance due. They wanted me gone, but they weren't going to win by wearing me down or sweet-talking me out the door. No, if I left, I'd do it on my terms, with everything they owed me, and then some. And promises made in silence are the ones I always keep. I stayed in my room longer than I meant to after dinner. The laughter downstairs drifted up faintly, muffled by the walls, like a party happening in someone else's house. I washed my face, reapplied lipstick, and stared at myself in the mirror for a moment too long. The woman looking back didn't seem broken, but she wasn't whole either. When I finally walked into the dining room, it was already buzzing with noise. The long table was dressed with ivory cloth and too many wine glasses. Everyone had taken their seats, passing dishes like peace offerings, laughing too loudly, pretending too well. I slipped into the chair at the far end, next to Thalora, a friend of Merrick's family who'd stayed close with me after his passing. She gave me a quick glance, warm, knowing. No words, just a look that told me she still saw me. Silvara's voice floated above the others, buttery and too polished. When Merrick took that job in Dallas, we all thought he was running away from responsibility. But look at what he built for us. This house, this life. She placed her napkin neatly on her lap. Of course, the timing of the retirement party is just perfect. She paused, clearly expecting acknowledgement. Dorian nodded, glass in hand. Mom's right. He left us with everything in place, and now it's up to us to carry that forward. Their words hung like ornaments on a tree, already heavy with pretense. Not once did they mention who'd actually made the payments after Merrick's job went south. Not the failed investments. Not the late-night phone calls to mortgage lenders. Not me. I picked at the edge of my plate with my fork, pushing carrots into a line, as if aligning something, anything, would help me breathe. Silvara turned her attention toward me like a cat suddenly noticing the mouse had returned to the room. "Venora, dear," she said sweetly, "I was thinking, for tomorrow's celebration, maybe you should take a step back. Let the family shine a bit." I didn't look up. Dorian chuckled. "Besides, no one's expecting you to speak anyway." That got a few giggles from the cousins. Short, sharp, unthinking laughs. The kind that echo for hours in your head later. I froze. Not because it hurt, it did, but because it was so ordinary, so public, so easy for them. It was like I'd been edited out in real time, with everyone nodding as if this was the natural order of things. Venora, the silent supporter. Venora, the helper. Venora, the one who doesn't speak. My hand tightened around my fork until my knuckles ached. I could have stood up, thrown the chair back, shouted the numbers, every damn cent I paid, every holiday I skipped, every sacrifice I made, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there. I chose this family, I thought. I chose this house, this name. I signed the damn mortgage. Maybe this was my punishment, for believing that being good would be enough, for thinking loyalty earned love, for mistaking silence as strength. And in that moment, I wanted to vanish. Not just from the room, but from the whole thing. Sell my part of the house, disappear into a town where no one knew my name, where I wouldn't be Merrick's widow or Silvara's in-law. Just Venora. I reached for my water glass. My hand was trembling, not from rage, but from something deeper. Bone-deep weariness. An ache that had no clear origin, just accumulation. And then I felt it. A hand on mine, warm, steady, Thalora. She didn't look at me, just held on. It was small. It was everything. Someone saw me. In that moment, a shift happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet repositioning of my spine. My breath evened out. My fork dropped gently onto the plate. If I couldn't erase the debt, then I'd erase the fantasy they built on my back. Let them shine tomorrow. Let them stand in their staged glory. And when the time is right, I'll speak in the only way they'll understand, not in anger, in truth. And illusions shatter best when the lights are brightest. The sky was still gray when I arrived at the event hall, the kind of morning light that makes everything feel like it's waiting to become real. A few early staff moved about, clipping floral garlands, rolling out round white linens, arranging folding chairs in straight, nervous rows. I walked the space quietly, like a stranger in a home built from my hands. There it was again, the oversized banner with Merrick's face, smiling in a grainy black and white photo from his oil field days. Tables stacked with programs, printed thick on glossy paper, listing names and sponsors. Every detail tidy, neat, polished, and scrubbed clean of me. The catering credit was assigned to Dorian's wife, Layla, who hadn't done more than taste test the deviled eggs. The decor, labeled as a collective family effort. The planning committee, all of Selvara's relatives. My name, again, was nowhere, like I had been air all along. Useful, but invisible. I didn't flinch this time. Didn't sigh, didn't blink. I just started taking mental notes. Not from hurt, at least not just hurt, but with the precision of someone building a case. The banners, the speeches, the guest book someone had placed on the entry table, all curated like a museum display, a version of the family that looked whole, generous, loving, a lie polished to a high shine. Selvara walked in 15 minutes later, floating through the room like royalty. She wore a soft mauve blouse, pearls around her neck. She didn't notice me at first. When she finally did, she smiled in that way she always did when she was about to say something meant to hurt. "Oh, Venora, there you are. I was just telling the staff. We'll keep you in the back today. Behind the scenes suits you best, don't you think?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. Dorian passed behind her, adjusting his jacket, not even looking at me. "Yeah, she prefers not to be in the spotlight anyway," he added. He didn't say it with malice. That would have at least felt honest. No, his voice was calm, offhanded, as if this was an established fact about me, like I was shy or allergic to applause. I smiled, small, tight, and said nothing. But I felt it, that shift inside. Like the exact moment a match is struck but hasn't yet caught fire. I excused myself before anyone else could offer more helpful assignments. In the women's restroom, I locked the stall and sat down on the closed lid of the toilet. My hands shook, my stomach turned. How many times had I let them do this? How many dinners, birthdays, holidays had I planned? How many months had I juggled finances to make sure no one missed a payment on this house? How many times had I swallowed my pride, convinced that being quiet made me strong? I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the files I'd tucked away like life preservers, scanned copies of wire transfers, notarized loan documents, emails with the lender, all under my name. All tied to my income, my choices. There, in black and white, was the truth they couldn't erase. My name, on every sacrifice they pretended didn't exist. I stared at my signature, neat, slightly slanted, always signed in blue ink because I like to see it stand out. That was the woman they tried to write out of the story. Not anymore. Not again. I straightened my shoulders, unlocked the stall, and washed my hands slowly. The woman in the mirror still looked calm, but her eyes? Sharper. Focused. I stepped out of the restroom and into the hallway. Took a breath. Then dialed. "Hey, it's me," I said, voice steady. "Just confirming everything's ready." "Yes. If I ask, you hit send. No delay." A pause on the other end. "Yes," I repeated. "Everything's in place." I ended the call before emotion could catch up with me. Then I walked back into that hall with the faintest smile. I wasn't angry. I was ready. And this time, my silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. They thought I was erased, but I had already carved my truth into stone. I stepped into the ballroom just as the quartet started tuning their instruments. It was barely 4:30 in the afternoon, and already guests were drifting in, draped in pearls, polished shoes, and the faint scent of old money, the kind of crowd that judged with their eyes first, then their lineage second. I walked through them like water around rocks, smiling, nodding. "Thank you for coming." "Yes, it's a lovely turnout, isn't it?" I kept my tone light, my posture poised. No one knew that beneath my calm, my thoughts were coiled and precise. Selvara held court near the entry arch, flanked by two cousins who laughed like trained birds at every word she spoke. Dorian stood just behind her, hand resting on the small of her back like he was propping up royalty. They'd won, for now. To every guest, I was just the accommodating daughter-in-law, the woman who answered emails and picked up flowers, but never took the mic, background noise, wallpaper with a pulse. I blended into the edges of their carefully staged narrative, and I let them believe it. When the house lights dimmed slightly and the MC tapped the mic, the room hushed into expectation. People took their seats, drinks in hand, napkins folded into fans, just like the ones Selvara used to teach me in the early days, back when she pretended to want me in the family. Now those same folds sat on every plate like delicate little reminders of exclusion. The program began. Speeches flowed. The first came from a church friend, the second from a retired co-worker. Then Selvara stepped onto the platform, draped in lavender satin and pride. Her voice carried effortlessly, oozing charm and self-importance. This celebration wouldn't have come together without my son, Dorian, and of course our dear niece Madison, who poured her heart into every detail. A wave of applause rolled through the room. I stood off to the side, next to the dessert table, the smile frozen on my face. Not a mention, not a whisper of my name, just as they planned. But instead of flinching, I focused on the glass in my hand, cold stem between my fingers, my back straight, my breath even. You learn, after enough years, that anger doesn't need volume, it needs timing. I had the documents, the emails, the statements, all of it prepared, sitting quietly in a folder on my phone, ready to show the truth. But unleashing it now would look like bitterness. Spite. Exactly the picture Selvara had painted of me behind closed doors. No, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I needed the invitation, and I knew it would come. Dinner was served next. Prime rib, sautéed greens, buttery mashed potatoes sculpted like art. I barely touched mine. I wasn't hungry. I was waiting. As I looked down at my plate, something caught my eye. A single folded napkin placed directly in front of me, creased in that same triangular pattern I'd folded 100 times for Selvara when she first asked me to help with Christmas table settings years ago. Back then, it had felt like inclusion. Now it felt like a signature on a fake contract. I didn't touch it, just looked at it. Let it sit between us like a challenge. That was when Thalora leaned toward me and whispered, "You okay?" I didn't answer, just gave her a nod. Then the moment arrived. A man I didn't recognize, friend of the family maybe, raised his glass and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Venora, I think you should say a few words. You've been quietly running the show back there." Laughter rippled politely. Selvara gave a practiced smile. "Oh, I'm sure she'd rather not. She's always preferred the background." I turned to her and met her eyes. "Actually," I said softly, setting my glass down, "I'd love to." The shift in the room was instant. Chairs adjusted. Eyes turned. Selvara blinked but didn't stop me. She couldn't, not without revealing too much. I stood slowly, picked up my champagne, and walked toward the center. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor. I raised the glass, letting the silence settle. And as the glass touched my lips, I knew the silence was finally over. The stem of the glass felt cool in my fingers, steadying. I raised it slowly, giving the room time to settle. All eyes were on me now, just where they never wanted them to be. I smiled. Not a smug smile, not the brittle grin Selvara wore like armor. Mine was soft, centered, quietly sharp. "I just want to say how grateful I am," I began, my voice calm, level, smooth, like I was still playing by their rules. It's not every day we get to celebrate a legacy like Selvara's. Her years of service, her dedication, her relentless attention to detail. That line earned some chuckles from the front row. Selvara beamed, mistaking it for flattery. "She's been the anchor for this family," I added, and she nodded slightly, as if to say, "Finally, someone gets it." And I'd like to thank everyone here, friends, neighbors, extended family, for showing up tonight to honor her. It's a beautiful thing, community. I let that line breathe. The mood in the room softened again. People smiled. Glasses lifted. It was working. Calm water, smooth sailing. Then I shifted my weight to the other foot, eyes sweeping the room until they landed squarely on Dorian and Silvara. But tonight, I continued, letting the edge slip into my tone, isn't just about retirement. A pause. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations stilled. The energy dropped into something dense. It's also about the debts we hide behind celebration. The silence rippled through the tables. I could feel the air contract. Silvara's smile froze in place, her lips still parted like she'd been about to laugh. Dorian leaned forward slightly, his brow pinched. I held the pause, watching them both absorb it. See? I went on, gently swirling the champagne in my glass. It's easy to talk about legacy when everyone's looking at banners and centerpieces. But sometimes legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you owe. There were stirs now. A few eyebrows raised. A whisper to the left. A quiet shifting of seats. Good. They were listening. I've stayed quiet for years, I said, still not raising my voice. I smiled through decisions I didn't make, paid bills I didn't sign, put my name on paperwork no one else wanted to deal with. Silvara's eyes narrowed. Dorian looked down, probably hoping I'd suddenly change course. But there was no detour. I was already midstream. Like the mortgage, I added. And there it was, a sharp inhale from someone near the back. Yes, I said, nodding slowly. That mortgage, the $900,000 debt attached to the very house many of you have visited, the home Dorian and Silvara stand so proudly in. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a neat folder. No drama, no flourish, just clean, calm proof. I brought copies, I said, opening it. Receipts, payments, my name, right there, every month, for years. Gasps now, audible ones. I turned to face the crowd more fully. So while we gather here to celebrate retirement and family, I thought it might be a good time to clarify a few things. Someone near the front leaned over to whisper to their partner. A woman in the third row blinked at the folder, then at Silvara, who suddenly had the posture of a woman balancing on glass. You erased me from the program, I said, gaze locked on Silvara now. From the credits, from the planning, even from your memory, apparently, but not from the payments, not from the bank, not from reality. I could feel the weight of it landing. And here's the truth, I added. Paper can lie. People can lie louder. But numbers? They don't. Silvara let out a light laugh, but it was hollow. She's clearly emotional, she said, aiming her voice at the crowd. She's twisting things. You know how sensitive. She's exaggerating. Dorian jumped in, his voice thinner than usual. She helped. Yes, but she wasn't the only one. This is her trying to make herself the victim. I turned to him slowly. I signed the loan, Dorian. Not you, not her, me. You think I wanted to? I did it because you said we'd be a family, because you said we'd share the burden. I scanned the crowd. Funny how burdens are always shared on paper but not at parties. Someone muttered Jesus near the back. A guest I didn't recognize stood and quietly left. The room had shifted completely, no longer on their side. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just picked up my glass again and said clearly, here's to freedom, from debts, from lies, from cages built on my back. I raised the glass to my lips and drank, slow, measured. The silence that followed was louder than any applause could have been. I set the glass back down and looked across the crowd. They didn't know what to do with it. And in that silence, I saw the cracks in their empire spreading fast. The silence after my final toast wasn't empty. It was electric. You could hear people thinking, whispering without words. Eyes darted between me, the documents in my hand, and the two people I had just stripped bare in front of everyone. Then the murmurs started, soft at first, like a breeze passing through dry leaves. A few guests stood up quietly, gathering their coats with downcast eyes, as if they couldn't bear to watch the wreckage unfold. I didn't move. I just stood there. Selvara's heels clacked against the floor as she stormed toward me, each step like a warning shot. "You need to stop this, right now," she snapped, her voice sharp but cracking. "You're embarrassing the family." I tilted my head just slightly. Funny. I thought I was the family. Behind her, Dorian stepped forward, close enough that I could feel the tension rolling off him. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath, low enough so only I could hear. My eyes didn't even flicker. I reached into the side pocket of my clutch. Calm, deliberate. I pulled out one last sheet of paper, the final card they never thought I'd play. "You want to talk about regret?" I said, holding it up for him to see. "Then maybe you should have read this before signing my name." He paled. His lips parted slightly, then pressed shut again. I turned to the nearest table. "Some of you know I co-signed on the house. What you don't know is that while I was footing the payments, they were leveraging my credit to secure loans. Loans used to renovate, invest, and expand Selvara's precious legacy, without telling me." Gasps again. And phones. At least 3 were raised now, recording. No more whispers. Just stunned faces. "I found the documents last month," I continued. "All buried under years of mail redirected from the old mailbox. My name was on everything, used like a ladder while I stayed at the bottom holding it steady." Selvara lunged for the paper, but I stepped back. Dorian grabbed her arm. "Don't!" he hissed at her. "Just let it go." "Oh, now you want to play calm?" she shot back, loud enough for the front row to hear. "You're the one who begged her to sign that loan. You said it was just for a year, that we'd refinance. You swore—" "Because you said you'd cover it with your retirement lump sum," Dorian snapped. "And I would've, if you hadn't blown half of it on that dumb landscaping business." Their argument unraveled in front of everyone, like old wallpaper peeling away in humid air. Guests sat frozen, their wine forgotten, forks left dangling mid-air. One of Selvara's cousins got up and walked out. Another leaned in toward her husband and whispered something, shaking her head. I stood in the middle of it all, unbothered. This wasn't noise. It was clarity. I looked down at the mic still in my hand. Then, without a word, I placed it gently on the table and stepped away. No more shouting. No more defending. I'd said what mattered. As I moved toward the exit, a gentle hand touched my elbow. Thalora. She walked beside me like she had since the beginning, quietly and without judgment. "You did it," she whispered, her voice soft as silk. "You're free." Outside, the air was cool, crisp. I hadn't realized how stifling it had been inside until I breathed in the quiet. We didn't say much walking to the car, just the soft click of my heels and the hum of night. Back home, the house was quiet. I kicked off my shoes and curled into the corner of the couch, still in my dress. I didn't turn on the lights right away, just let the street lamp outside paint soft gold across the floor. I reached for the stack of papers in my bag and laid them out on the coffee table. It wasn't the mortgage itself that felt heavy anymore. It was the weight of what I'd carried alone for so long. Financially, legally, emotionally, every signature, every silent compromise. I touched the edge of the original loan document. My name, typed neatly. Trusted too easily. "I chose this," I whispered. "I thought I was choosing love, a family." I looked around the room. Same furniture, same framed photos, but something inside me had shifted. "They thought I'd stay because of the house," I said to no one. "But I've realized, walls don't make a home. Integrity does." I wasn't free of the debt, not yet. But I was no longer chained to the illusion. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, finally still. The wound was still there, but it no longer dictated my reflection. Outside, the last of the guests had probably gone home. Maybe Selvara was still trying to spin her version of events. Maybe Dorian was drowning in explanations. But I didn't care. The party ended, but for me it was the beginning of freedom.